After years of apartment living, I had finally saved enough for a down payment on my dream home. Oakwood Estates was exactly what I had been searching for: mature trees lining quiet streets, manicured lawns stretching before charming homes, and most importantly, a sense of community I had longed for all my adult life. The previous owner had been a retired hydraulic engineer who had installed a custom rainwater collection system that not only reduced water bills, but also helped maintain a lush garden even during drought restrictions. The property listing had proudly featured this eco-friendly system as a major selling point. The neighbors welcomed me warmly during my first week. Thomas Johnson from next door brought over a homemade apple pie. The elderly Mrs. Peterson across the street invited me for afternoon tea and shared neighborhood stories. The Garcia family from down the block helped me unload the moving truck and refused payment beyond a pizza dinner. I felt I had found not just a house, but a true home. 2 weeks after moving in, I received an invitation to the monthly neighborhood barbecue. People gathered in the community park, children playing on swings while adults chatted over grilled burgers and cold drinks. That was where I first met Deborah Wilson, the Homeowners Association president. She approached with a clipboard in hand and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You must be the new owner of 1542 Maple Drive," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I have been meaning to stop by and welcome you officially to Oakwood Estates. We take great pride in our community standards here." Her gaze drifted past me, scrutinizing my property visible from the park. "That water collection system is quite unique. Did you install that yourself?" I explained that it came with the house and had all proper permits and approvals. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we will need to review that. The HOA has strict guidelines about external modifications. I am sure you understand the importance of neighborhood aesthetics." The following morning, I found my first violation notice taped to my front door. Apparently, my mailbox was 2 inches taller than regulation height. The day after, another notice cited non-approved plantings in the front garden bed. Within a week, 5 separate violations had been documented, each more trivial than the last. Then one morning, I discovered my rainwater tank nearly empty. The previous night had brought heavy rain, and the tank should have been at least 3/4 full. I checked the system for leaks but found none. The drainage valve had been opened manually. This seemed odd, but I closed it and wrote it off as a possible mistake I had made while learning the system. 3 days later, it happened again. This time I was certain I had not touched the valve. The tank had been drained completely, wasting hundreds of gallons of collected rainwater. That afternoon, I spotted Deborah slowly driving past my house, making notes on her clipboard. The next day, I approached her directly as she conducted her inspection rounds of the neighborhood. "Deborah, I notice someone has been opening the drainage valve on my rainwater collection system. Would you happen to know anything about that?" Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes hardened. "Perhaps your system is malfunctioning. These unauthorized modifications often cause problems. The HOA has specific protocols for water management systems." "The system was approved before I purchased the house," I replied. "All permits are in order." She adjusted her designer sunglasses and checked her watch. "Those approvals may have expired. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA covenant clearly states that all external systems must be reviewed annually. Failure to comply could result in fines starting at $500. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our regulations." As she walked away, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm sunshine. This was not about regulations or community standards. The calculated look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was a power play, pure and simple, and somehow I had become her target. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time Deborah conducted her inspections in our cul-de-sac, my rainwater tank would mysteriously drain overnight. The correlation was too perfect to be coincidence. After the 4th incident, I decided to take action. I purchased a weatherproof security camera with night vision capabilities and installed it discreetly under the eaves of my roof, positioned with a clear view of the water system. The wait was not long. 3 days later, my phone alert buzzed at 5:47 a.m. The motion detector had been triggered. I grabbed my phone and watched the live feed with mounting anger. There was Deborah, dressed in a dark tracksuit as if going for an early morning jog, deliberately opening the drainage valve on my tank. She worked methodically, checking her watch repeatedly as the precious rainwater gurgled away into the storm drain. Before leaving, she took several photos of the area with her phone, presumably to manufacture more violations. That afternoon, I prepared carefully for the confrontation. I downloaded the video footage and made 3 backup copies. I reviewed the HOA covenant, highlighting all sections pertaining to property modifications and water systems. I even called the county permit office to confirm that my rainwater collection system was fully compliant with local regulations. Armed with this information, I waited on my front porch until I saw Deborah begin her daily rounds. "Good afternoon, Deborah," I called out pleasantly as she approached my property. "I was hoping to catch you. I have been having some issues with my rainwater system and thought you might help me understand what is happening." She paused at my walkway, clipboard at the ready. "As I mentioned before, unauthorized systems often develop problems the HOA cannot be responsible for." I cut her off by holding up my phone, the video playing clearly on the screen. "Actually, I think I found the source of the problem. This was captured early this morning." Her face transformed as she watched herself on the screen. First came shock, then denial, followed quickly by righteous indignation. "You have no right to record me. This is a violation of privacy and completely inappropriate." "Not as inappropriate as trespassing on private property and tampering with a permitted water system," I replied calmly. "I am curious which HOA regulation authorizes you to enter properties without permission and drain water tanks." Her strategy shifted instantly. Section 22, Paragraph 7 clearly authorizes the HOA board to inspect and remedy unapproved water collection systems that could impact community drainage. Your system is not in compliance. I produced the folder of documents I had prepared. Here are the original permits, the county approval, and the relevant sections of the HOA covenant. Nothing authorizes entering private property without notice or consent. Nothing permits tampering with approved systems. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You clearly do not understand how things work in Oakwood Estates. The HOA has broad discretionary powers to maintain community standards. This could escalate to fines, property liens, or even legal action if you continue to be difficult." That evening I pored over the HOA documentation, searching for any basis for her claims. What I discovered was disturbing. The actual regulations were reasonable and fairly standard, but Deborah had been selectively misinterpreting and misapplying them to suit her purposes. The supposed Section 22, Paragraph 7, she had cited did not exist in the current covenant. The next day I ran into my neighbor Thomas while collecting my mail. His usual cheerful greeting seemed subdued. "Everything okay, Thomas?" I asked. He glanced around nervously before speaking in a lowered voice. "I saw Deborah at your place yesterday. Be careful with her. She has ways of making life difficult for people who cross her." This piqued my interest. "Has she done this before?" Thomas hesitated before nodding slowly. "The Richardsons who lived in your house before they left because of her started with small violations, escalated to daily harassment. Same with the Patels across the street last year. She finds something about your property she does not like and fixates on it. Why does nobody stand up to her?" "Fear," he admitted. "She has connections with local officials, real estate agents, property managers. People worry about their home values, their standing in the community. Most just give in and make whatever changes she demands. Others eventually sell and leave." As Thomas spoke, I realized the extent of Deborah's influence. She had cultivated a climate of fear and compliance through systematic intimidation. The neighborhood lived under her shadow, most residents too afraid to challenge her authority. But unlike those before me, I had no intention of being silenced or driven away. This was my home now, and I would not become another silent victim of her petty tyranny. What began as a personal battle took an unexpected turn 3 weeks into our conflict. My next-door neighbor Thomas knocked on my door early one Saturday morning, his expression troubled. "Sorry to bother you," he began, "but have you been having water pressure problems lately? Our shower barely had enough pressure to rinse shampoo this morning, and this is the third time this week." Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Peterson from across the street, her voice anxious. Her oxygen concentrator, which required consistent water pressure for cooling, had been malfunctioning intermittently. At her age, this was not merely an inconvenience but a genuine health concern. By mid-M. Morning, I had received similar complaints from 4 other neighbors, all describing identical symptoms: weak water pressure, particularly in the early mornings. The timing corresponded exactly with when Deborah had been draining my rainwater tank. This correlation seemed impossible, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Determined to understand the connection, I contacted a local plumber who specialized in custom water systems. Marco Rivera arrived that afternoon, a seasoned professional with 30 years of experience in residential water infrastructure. Marco inspected my rainwater collection system thoroughly, occasionally whistling with appreciation at its design. "This is not your standard setup," he explained, crawling out from under the main tank. "Whoever installed this was a genuine expert." I mentioned that the previous owner had been a hydraulic engineer. "That explains it," Marco nodded. "What you have here is not just a rainwater collection system. It is an integrated pressure support mechanism for the entire cul-de-sac." He sketched a diagram as he explained. The previous owner had designed the system to supplement neighborhood water pressure during peak usage hours. The collected rainwater was fed into a pressurized tank with a sophisticated valve system that automatically engaged when municipal water pressure dropped below a certain threshold. During morning showers, lawn watering, or other high-demand periods, your system kicks in to maintain consistent pressure for at least 6 homes in your immediate vicinity, Marco explained. When someone drains your tank completely, the system cannot compensate, and everyone experiences pressure drops. The implications were staggering. Each time Deborah drained my rainwater tank, she was unknowingly affecting the water supply for multiple homes. The evidence mounted quickly. Thomas reported that his garden irrigation system had failed repeatedly, drowning some plants while leaving others parched. The Garcias down the street had experienced minor basement flooding from a backflow issue directly following one of the drainage incidents. Most concerning was Mrs. Peterson's situation. Her medical equipment required stable water pressure, and the fluctuations had forced her to rely on bottled oxygen tanks, a significant expense and inconvenience for an elderly woman on a fixed income. "Can you document all this?" I asked Marco. "The connection between my system and the neighborhood water pressure, the likely effects of sudden drainage." "Absolutely," he confirmed. "This is actually a brilliant system that benefits everyone. Whoever is tampering with it is creating a genuine infrastructure problem for the whole area." Armed with this knowledge, I began methodically documenting each drainage incident, complete with timestamps from my security footage, corresponding complaints from neighbors, and expert assessment of the impacts. I created a detailed log showing the clear correlation between Deborah's actions and neighborhood water issues. I approached affected neighbors one by one, carefully explaining the situation. Most were shocked to learn that their water problems stemmed from deliberate tampering rather than municipal supply issues. Mrs. Peterson was particularly disturbed when I showed her footage of Deborah draining the tank just 30 minutes before her oxygen concentrator had failed. "She knows about my health condition," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "I mentioned my equipment at the last HOA meeting when requesting permission to install a medical alert system. She assured me maintaining consistent utilities was a top HOA priority." The Garcia family shared stories of Deborah photographing their children's bicycles left in the driveway, resulting in violation notices. The Johnsons had received fines for a bird feeder that allegedly violated HOA aesthetic standards. Each household had experienced some form of harassment, but none had recognized the pattern until now. I offered to install small pressure monitors in their homes, documenting exactly when pressure dropped and by how much. Most eagerly agreed, grateful that someone was finally addressing the mysterious water issues. Within a week, I had compiled irrefutable evidence linking Deborah's tank drainage to specific problems in 6 different homes. What had begun as personal harassment had evolved into a community health and safety issue. Deborah's actions were not merely petty or vindictive, they were potentially dangerous, particularly for vulnerable residents like Mrs. Peterson. As I reviewed the growing evidence file on my laptop, I realized this had expanded beyond a simple HOA dispute. This was about protecting our community from someone willing to endanger others in pursuit of her own agenda. The time had come to bring everything into the light. Under the guise of a neighborhood watch meeting, I invited the affected homeowners to gather in Thomas's basement recreation room on a Tuesday evening. I was nervous about attendance. Deborah's influence ran deep, and fear of retaliation might keep people away. To my surprise and relief, representatives from 17 households arrived, far more than I had anticipated. Thomas had arranged chairs in a semicircle and provided refreshments. As people settled in, sharing small talk and curious glances, I could sense both apprehension and hope in the room. These were people who had lived under Deborah's shadow for years, each believing they were facing her alone. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing before the small gathering. "I know many of you are taking a risk simply by being here." I explained what I had discovered about my rainwater system and its connection to neighborhood water pressure. Using simple diagrams and Marco's professional assessment, I illustrated how Deborah's deliberate drainage of my tank had directly caused problems throughout the community. "This is why your shower lost pressure, Mrs. Peterson. This is why your basement flooded, Mr. Johnson. This is why your irrigation system failed, Mrs. Garcia." The room grew tense as understanding dawned. I shared selected clips from my security footage, showing Deborah methodically opening the drainage valve on multiple occasions. "So she has been causing these problems deliberately?" Thomas asked, his usual mild manner giving way to anger. "Deliberately draining my tank, yes," I clarified. "Though I do not believe she understood the full impact on the neighborhood. She was targeting me specifically, but affecting all of you in the process." Jim Perkins, a retired accountant from the north end of the neighborhood, raised his hand. "This explains the water issues, but I have concerns that go beyond this. I requested the HOA financial records 3 months ago, a right guaranteed to all members under state law. I am still waiting, despite multiple follow-ups." This opened the floodgates. Maria Gonzalez, a former city planner, pointed out that several mandatory home renovations in the community had been completed by Westlake Construction, a company owned by Deborah's brother-in-law, Michael Westlake. "The pattern is consistent," Maria explained. "Deborah cites violations, mandates specific repairs, and recommends Westlake Construction as the HOA-approved contractor. Their estimates are consistently 20 to 30% above market rate." The revelations continued. Thomas had been forced to replace his entire driveway due to non-compliant concrete coloring that was supposedly 1 shade too dark. The $12,000 job had been completed by Westlake Construction. The Garcias had replaced perfectly functional windows because they allegedly did not meet energy efficiency standards. Another Westlake job, another $8,000. Most surprising was when Whitney Chen, the current HOA board secretary, cautiously raised her hand. "I have noticed discrepancies in the financial reports," she admitted. "Expenditures categorized as community maintenance with no supporting documentation. When I questioned these, Deborah said detailed records were kept separately for security reasons. I feared losing my position if I pushed further." The picture becoming clear was disturbing. Deborah had been using her position to generate business for her brother-in-law's construction company, creating violations where none existed and directing thousands of dollars in unnecessary renovations to Westlake Construction. The financial irregularities suggested possible kickbacks or embezzlement of HOA funds. "So what do we do now?" Thomas asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "We organize," I replied. "Separately, we are vulnerable. Together, we have power." The impromptu meeting transformed into a strategic planning session. We formed committees focused on different aspects of our response. Jim Perkins would lead the financial investigation team, working with Whitney to analyze HOA records and identify suspicious transactions. Maria Gonzalez headed the legal research committee, determining our rights under state HOA laws. Thomas volunteered to coordinate communication, creating a secure group chat for sharing information without Deborah's knowledge. I would continue gathering evidence about the water system tampering, working with Marco to document the connection between drainage and neighborhood impact. Others volunteered to review past violation notices, identifying patterns and potentially fraudulent citations. We need to be methodical and thorough, I cautioned. Deborah has built her position on intimidation and fear. Our response must be based on irrefutable evidence and unity. As the meeting concluded, the mood had transformed from nervous apprehension to determined resolve. Neighbors who had barely spoken before exchanged phone numbers and handshakes. People lingered in small groups, sharing stories of Deborah's tactics and offering support to one another. Mrs. Peterson touched my arm as she prepared to leave. "Thank you," she said simply. "For years I thought I was alone in this, we all did." That night, lying in bed, I reflected on how my simple desire for a peaceful home had evolved into something far greater. What began as my personal defense against an unjust authority had transformed into a neighborhood revolution. For the first time since moving to Oakwood Estates, I felt the true spirit of community, not in the manicured lawns or coordinated mailboxes, but in the shared determination to stand together against injustice. Tomorrow, we would begin gathering evidence. But tonight, a sense of hope had already taken root. Seemingly sensing the shifting dynamics in the neighborhood, Deborah escalated her campaign against me. The morning after our secret meeting, I found 3 separate violation notices on my door. One cited excessive morning dew accumulation on my lawn. Another claimed my grass was non-regulation shade of green. The third warned about unauthorized gathering of precipitation by my rainwater system. The absurdity might have been amusing if not backed by threats of escalating fines. Thomas reported similar notices on his door, as did everyone who had attended our meeting. Deborah was sending a clear message. She knew we were organizing, and she was responding with a show of force. My security cameras captured her entering my property at dawn, methodically tampering with the water valves and taking photos from manipulative angles. She would snap pictures of a garden hose from 6 different positions, presumably to make it appear as multiple violations. In one particularly bold move, she actually moved my garbage bin 6 inches from its proper position, photographed it, then left a violation notice for improper waste receptacle placement. Meanwhile, our neighborhood alliance worked diligently behind the scenes. Jim Perkins and Whitney Chen discovered alarming financial discrepancies. Over $87,000 in HOA funds had been allocated for emergency infrastructure repairs in the past year, all contracted to Westlake Construction with minimal documentation. Maria Gonzalez confirmed that Deborah had been overstepping her legal authority. As HOA presidents in our state were not permitted to enter private property without explicit written permission or a court order. 2 weeks into our investigation, Deborah made her next move. Every household received a formal notice of an emergency HOA meeting to address what she termed a neighborhood water infrastructure crisis undermining community stability. The notice specifically cited my illegal modifications as the source of ongoing water pressure problems. The community center buzzed with tension on the evening of the meeting. Nearly every household was represented, an unprecedented attendance. Deborah stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation ready, flanked by the remaining board members and a man in an expensive suit whom I recognized from photos as Michael Westlake, her brother-in-law. "Thank you all for coming to this crucial emergency session," Deborah began, her voice carrying the practiced concern of a politician. "As many of you have experienced, our neighborhood has been suffering from serious water pressure issues and infrastructure failures." She clicked through slides showing photos of minor flooding in the Johnsons' basement, Mrs. Peterson's garden hose with barely a trickle coming out, and a close-up of my rainwater collection system with ominous red circles highlighting various components. Our investigation has identified the root cause, she continued, her gaze fixing on me. An unauthorized water collection system at 1542 Maple Drive has been creating dangerous pressure fluctuations throughout our community. This system was installed without proper engineering oversight and poses a significant risk to our neighborhood infrastructure. I watched as she skillfully twisted the truth, presenting my beneficial system as the very cause of the problems she herself had created. With theatrical concern, she introduced Michael Westlake. "Fortunately, we have an immediate solution," she announced. "Westlake Construction has prepared a comprehensive infrastructure upgrade proposal to address these critical issues." Michael stepped forward, all business in his tailored suit. "Our assessment indicates the need for complete replacement of supplemental water systems and installation of pressure regulators at each affected property. The total project cost is approximately $175,000, which would require a special assessment of $3,500 per household." The room filled with murmurs of concern. For many families, this represented a significant financial burden. Deborah smiled reassuringly. "We understand this is substantial, but the safety of our community must be our priority. We will allow payment plans for those facing financial hardship." She paused, surveying the room with the confidence of someone who had played this game many times before and never lost. "Unless there are objections, the board will vote immediately to approve this emergency measure." The room fell silent. Despite our preparation, the boldness of her move had caught us off guard. She was using the very problem she had caused to extract thousands of dollars from each household, money that would flow directly to her brother-in-law's company. I stood, laptop and portable projector in hand. "I would like 5 minutes to respond if the board permits." Deborah's smile tightened. "This is not a debate forum. The board will now vote." Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws guarantees members the right to speak at any meeting before board votes are taken. Maria Gonzalez interrupted from the back, holding up the official HOA documentation. "Minimum speaking time is 5 minutes per member on any agenda item." Trapped by her own rules, Deborah reluctantly nodded. 5 minutes, no more." I connected my laptop to the projector as Thomas dimmed the lights. What followed was a methodically presented case built on 3 weeks of careful documentation. I began with time-stamped video showing Deborah deliberately opening my drainage valve on 6 separate occasions. Each of these drainage events directly preceded reported water pressure problems throughout the neighborhood, I explained, showing a chart correlating drainage times with complaint logs from affected households. I presented Marco Rivera's professional assessment confirming that my system actually benefited neighborhood water pressure rather than harming it. "The only time this system causes problems is when someone deliberately drains it, as you have seen Deborah doing repeatedly." Whitney Chen presented financial records showing questionable transactions between the HOA and Westlake Construction, including projects approved without competitive bidding and payments far exceeding documented work. Maria Gonzalez explained the legal violations involved in entering private property without permission and tampering with approved water systems. The most damning evidence came last: documentation of similar patterns in 3 previous neighborhoods where Deborah had served on HOA boards before leaving amid unresolved financial questions. In each case, unnecessary renovations had been mandated, special assessments collected, and contracts awarded to Westlake Construction. "This is not about water systems or community standards," I concluded. "This is about systematic exploitation of homeowners through manufactured violations, intimidation, and financial mismanagement." As I finished, the room erupted in questions and calls for accountability. Deborah attempted to regain control, her voice rising above the commotion. "These accusations are slanderous. This is clearly a coordinated attack on the board's authority." But her words fell on deaf ears. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled before the community she had manipulated for years. Board members physically moved away from her, creating distance between themselves and the emerging scandal. Michael Westlake quietly packed his presentation materials and slipped out a side door. As the meeting descended into heated discussion, I watched Deborah's face transform from confident authority to shocked disbelief. For perhaps the first time since she began her reign over Oakwood Estates, she was facing something she could not control or intimidate into submission: the united will of an informed community standing together against corruption. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded with startling speed. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, Deborah launched her counterattack. A certified letter arrived at my door threatening legal action for defamation of character, unauthorized recording, and conspiracy to undermine the homeowners association. Her attorney demanded a public retraction of all claims and the destruction of all video evidence. Similar letters arrived at the homes of Thomas, Jim, Whitney, and others who had spoken at the meeting. The intimidation tactic might have worked in the past, but now it only strengthened our resolve and confirmed our suspicions. What Deborah had not anticipated was how quickly her support system would collapse. By noon that same day, Vice President Richard Taylor submitted his resignation from the HOA board. His letter, which he copied to all homeowners, confirmed knowledge of the kickback scheme and admitted to looking the other way out of fear of Deborah's influence. "I can no longer in good conscience participate in a board that has strayed so far from its purpose of serving the community," he wrote. What began as minor ethical compromises evolved into systematic exploitation of the very neighbors we were elected to represent. The remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves, each issuing statements expressing shock at the revelations and pledging full cooperation. With any investigation. Overnight, Deborah found herself isolated, her network of enablers disintegrating in the face of public exposure. Community solidarity strengthened as neighbors shared previously undisclosed experiences. Melissa Jenkins came forward with a particularly disturbing account of how her elderly mother had been pressured into unnecessary renovations after Deborah reported safety violations that mysteriously disappeared once the work was completed by Westlake Construction. "My mother paid nearly $14,000 for repairs to a deck that a licensed inspector later confirmed was perfectly sound," Melissa revealed at an impromptu neighborhood gathering. She was afraid of being fined or forced to sell if she refused. The local newspaper caught wind of the story. A reporter connected Deborah to similar patterns in previous communities, including allegations of financial improprieties that had been settled out of court. The journalist uncovered that Deborah and her husband had moved through 4 different HOA communities in 12 years, each time leaving amid unresolved questions about special assessments and construction contracts. Most damning was the emergence of bank records showing systematic deposits to Deborah's personal account following major HOA expenditures with Westlake Construction. These coincided with her family's purchase of a vacation home and a luxury boat, acquisitions difficult to explain on her husband's middle management salary. As public pressure mounted, the remaining board members called for an emergency election to replace Deborah and establish new leadership. State HOA regulations required 30 days' notice, during which Deborah made one final attempt to maintain control. A community-wide letter appeared in every mailbox, portraying Deborah as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled residents resistant to necessary community improvements. She claimed all contracts with Westlake Construction had been properly vetted and approved by the full board. She portrayed herself as a dedicated volunteer whose only crime was caring too much about community standards. Her attempt at damage control backfired spectacularly when 3 former HOA treasurers from her previous neighborhoods contacted our community after seeing the newspaper article. Each provided corroborating evidence of similar financial irregularities, forced renovations, and eventually, Deborah's abrupt departure when questions became too pointed. Within 3 weeks of our confrontation, Deborah Wilson, the woman who had ruled our community through fear and intimidation for years, found herself not only removed from power but facing potential legal consequences. The county prosecutor's office opened an investigation into possible embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. Westlake Construction suspended operations pending review of their contracts and business practices. The woman who had made others tremble at the sight of her clipboard now avoided eye contact when retrieving her mail. The power she had wielded so absolutely had evaporated, replaced by the authentic power of a united community standing together against corruption. 1 month after the confrontation, Oakwood Estates held its emergency election in the community center. The turnout was unprecedented. Over 90% of homeowners participated, compared to the usual 15% at annual meetings. The atmosphere buzzed with energy as neighbors greeted each other with newfound camaraderie, the shared experience of exposing Deborah's schemes having created bonds that mere proximity never had. A completely new board was elected, composed of residents committed to transparency and genuine community service. Thomas became the new president, his gentle demeanor and quiet integrity making him the perfect antidote to Deborah's tyrannical reign. Jim Perkins was elected treasurer, his accounting background ideal for rebuilding financial accountability. Maria Gonzalez took charge of the Architectural Review Committee, promising fair and consistent application of community standards. To my surprise, neighbors nominated me to serve as a special consultant on water resources. "Your system was what exposed the corruption," Mrs. Peterson said when proposing my name. "It seems fitting that it should also be part of our recovery." The new board's first action was commissioning an independent engineering assessment of neighborhood infrastructure. The results confirmed what we had discovered. My rainwater collection system represented an innovative solution that benefited the entire community by supplementing water pressure during peak usage times. Far from being a problem, it was a model of sustainable design that could be expanded. The previous owner was ahead of his time, the engineering report concluded. This system has likely been saving each household hundreds of dollars annually in reduced water bills and prevented potential damage from pressure fluctuations. What followed was transformation through collaboration. We organized weekend work parties where neighbors of all ages helped expand the rainwater collection network. Children painted decorative rain barrels while adults installed connecting pipes and pressure regulators. Retired engineer Mr. Yamamoto provided technical guidance. The Garcia family prepared lunch for volunteers. Mrs. Peterson, though unable to assist physically, kept workers supplied with homemade lemonade and encouragement. Over the course of 3 months, we created an integrated network of rainwater collection points that reduced everyone's utility bills while providing drought resistance for the entire neighborhood. Properties that once competed for best lawn awards now collaborated on sustainable landscaping practices. The sense of community strengthened with each shared project, meals and stories exchanged on work days, creating connections that restrictive covenants never could. The HOA itself underwent complete restructuring. Meetings became forums for genuine community improvement rather than platforms for intimidation. Financial records were posted online monthly, with every expenditure fully documented and open to member review. The architectural review process was simplified and standardized, with clear guidelines replacing arbitrary enforcement. 1 year after Deborah's downfall, Oakwood Estates had become a model for sustainable living and transparent HOA governance. Delegations from other communities visited to learn from our experience, particularly our innovative water management system and cooperative governance approach. Meanwhile, Deborah faced the consequences of her actions. The county prosecutor pursued charges related to embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. Michael Westlake's construction company dissolved amid multiple investigations. The full extent of their scheme, spanning multiple communities and years of operation, proved more substantial than anyone had initially suspected. On the anniversary of our confrontation, we held a neighborhood celebration in the community park. Children played on the newly installed playground equipment, funded by recovered misappropriated funds. Families shared potluck dishes representing diverse cultural backgrounds. A community that once existed as separate households behind closed doors had become an interconnected neighborhood defined by cooperation and mutual support. The final victory came not from seeing Deborah brought to justice, though that provided necessary closure. The true triumph was in witnessing our community's evolution from disconnected households ruled by fear to a genuine neighborhood bound by shared purpose and respect. The water system that Deborah had tried to destroy became the lifeline that united us, demonstrating how even the most difficult conflicts can, with persistence and integrity, give birth to something greater than what exists.